Hey, what is up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you here today. I was just able to watch, I'm catching up on the Ruthless Aggression Series, Episode 3 on Evolution. In my previous two videos talking about the Ruthless Aggression Series, I talked about the fact that the Ruthless Aggression Era that ran from, I don't really want to know, like 2002 until about the time of like WrestleMania 21, I guess you can say, was a period of time that I wasn't really watching wrestling. I sort of got right back into wrestling at the very end of Evolution as Batista was winning the Royal Rumble. Batista was picking that he was going to wrestle Triple H at WrestleMania. And 21 was kind of like my way back. And that was a really, really good show. And a lot of people talk about like WrestleMania 17 being one of the greatest WrestleManias of all time. WrestleMania 21 really needs to be like in at least like your top five. That is a really, really great show, headlining by Triple H and Batista with the ultimate breakup of Evolution, making it where there was no place for that to grow. Much like a lot of the things that happened with the WWE Network, and where they started to go over the history of things that happened in the WWE, I think a lot of people will come into a documentary about Evolution basically thinking that it is going to be all about Triple H and him being the champion, and then forming this group to sort of be like the four horsemen of the WWE to sort of protect Triple H, and like Arn Anderson's goal was always to make sure that the championship is always around the waist of Ric Flair, and Arn would always have the match with the guy who was going to go for the champion, and Arn never won that match, but Arn made sure that when that guy was done in that match, he was not at 100% when he was going into his match against Flair, whether that was like a pay-per-view or a main Omni show or wherever they were going to have it. That guy was not going to be 100% going in to fight Flair. This documentary was a lot about Randy Orton, Batista, and Ric Flair finding themselves. Ric Flair, when he came from WCW at its dying days and joined WWE, it was mainly only to become like an on-screen persona. He came in and he was a 50-50 investor in WWE because he had bought Shane and Stephanie's shares of the company so they could buy WCW and ECW in the Invasion storyline. And once that was all dead and buried, Flair and Vince had to find a way to work together, which then led to the brand split with Flair taking Raw and Vince taking SmackDown. I said those wrong. It was the other direction. I apologize, because Undertaker got drafted to SmackDown, and then that's what led to the match against Flair because Undertaker didn't want to be with Flair. But, basically, Flair had lost his drive because of, what Vince Russo and Eric Bischoff had done to him, where basically he was just a guy that was putting over guys. He never really got to really be Ric Flair and live up to, that persona and be who he was and have real matches that meant things. He was the champion at times in the dying days of WCW, but one of those reigns, honestly, I think Kevin Nash just walked up to him and handed him the title and was like, here, this is yours now. You're the champion. Made no sense at all. So, when he came in, basically they had to have Flair versus Vince as a match at the Royal Rumble. And that was kind of like to say who was going to be in control of the company. Then, of course, when Stone Cold Steve Austin walked out, they didn't really have a plan. And Ric Flair was filling in one of those matches against Brock Lesnar. And then at the same time, Austin had an angle going with Eddie Guerrero that never got to play out. And Flair stepped in and wrestled the match against Eddie Guerrero at the pay-per-view, which sort of put Flair into wrestling matches that he never thought he was going to be wrestling. But he's Ric Flair. He's going to go out there and he's going to try his best. He can act the act. He can walk the walk. But when it came down to it, he was misjudging himself. And Triple H was basically saying, you're the only person in this arena right now that doesn't know that you're Ric Flair. And they were trying to find something for Ric Flair to remember who Ric Flair was, and Triple H was pitching to Vince that if we were able to put him on top, that would sort of kick something in his brain and get him going. And at the same time, they had two guys wrestling in developmental at that time, Randy Orton and Batista, looking for things to do. Orton came up to the main roster and was kind of like a shining star, wrestling on Raw and SmackDown. And during a match against Christian, dislocated his elbow. And it was very important that he finished that match, because that match was basically set up because Christian had stolen JR's cowboy hat, and Randy Orton had to return it in the segment. But Orton was taken off TV. They brought him back to TV to give sort of an update on his injury. And because of the fact the show was in Toronto in Canada, the crowd turned on him. And basically WWE thought they had lightning in the bottle. They turned Orton heel on a dime and kept making him have these injury updates. And he would just get more sarcastic and more sarcastic to the point where he finally came back. The people hated him. Batista came up to the main roster, being on the SmackDown brand with Brother Devon, where he was kind of like the usher that collected the money. He was the muscle behind it. There was nothing really behind it. And Batista was really in thought that the angle was so bad that he was going to lose his job and be fired. They pitched everybody coming together, and Vince was against it, but basically Triple H was able to convince him that, through this, we're going to be able to build the stars of the future, and plus we're going to be able to remind Ric Flair that he needs to be on top, and that he's one of the main guys in this company, even at this age that he's at today. And Vince ran with it, and the angle got kicked off to a pretty good start, and in one match, Randy Orton and Batista were taking on the Dudleys, and they both got injured. Basically, Batista tore his tricep, and at the same time during a move, Randy Orton shattered his ankle, and both guys were taken out. The angle continued somehow with only two of the four guys in there before Orton was able to make his return. And that sort of kept the thing running. But at this point that Batista was out, he was trying to rehab and trying to come back so fast that he actually tore the same tricep again and had to spend more time on the bench. During this point, it was thought that Mark Jindrak would take Batista's place, so they could have four members in there. Jindrak was sort of looked at as a guy that did have a promising future in the business. But Triple H basically thought that having Orton and Jindrak together kind of negative, took each other out of the game because of the fact that they just were young and they were immature. They weren't really taking the business seriously. Jindrak had a lot of upsides. He was a really good worker, but basically if they were together, Triple H thought that there was no way that Orton would progress, that he would actually, not take what he was doing seriously. And they stayed the charge, and one night on Monday Night Raw, Batista finally made his return, and we were actually able to live out the Evolution storyline, which was probably highlighted the most at the Armageddon pay-per-view, with Randy Orton beating RVD for the Intercontinental Championship, Batista and Ric Flair winning the tag titles from the Dudleys, and I think that's the night that Triple H won the World Heavyweight Championship in a triple threat with Goldberg and Kane, after Kane had won a Battle Royal on Raw to be added into that match, and it really didn't make sense that he was in there. But it is what it is. All four members of Evolution ended the pay-per-view holding the titles up on the stage, and that was one of the highlights of the thing. And from there, they started building the storyline of pushing the younger guys, which would tear Evolution down. Of course, at SummerSlam, they don't really go into the fact that, Orton, I don't even remember how Orton became the number one contender to fight against Chris Benoit. You only see Benoit for a millisecond. I think mostly it's because of the fact that I recognized his tights, you could tell that he was actually shown. But Orton wins the championship, shows up on Raw, and of course is punished and beaten and thrown out of the group from there. Triple H and Orton had a match. The match didn't really play out the way the WWE thought that it was going to, and so instead of just running with Orton versus Triple H, it sort of was just scrapped and thrown off to the side. And we started this build of getting to the Royal Rumble where Batista would win the Royal Rumble and then choose to fight Triple H at WrestleMania 21. They would go on to have 3 matches. I remember the first match was at WrestleMania. I think the third one was at Vengeance, which ended up being the Hell in the Cell. And that was like beating Triple H 3 times in a row was huge for anybody. But for Batista, it kind of put that crown on his head that he was the number 1 guy in the company. Even though in a couple months they would put him in the draft, ship him over to SmackDown, and bring Cena over to really be the guy that ran the company. But, Evolution, one hell of a run. I didn't get to see a whole bunch of it, and I'm sure that if I did watch wrestling at that point, it would have been really fun to see a heel Triple H be the main guy on Raw. Hey, I guess that's basically what's on TV today. But, I enjoyed this episode. The Brock episode is next, and after that, I'll be all caught up. I don't know what night of the week this airs, or if they just throw an episode up after a Monday Night Raw or a SmackDown or a pay-per-view, but even though the first one wasn't that good, I'm looking forward to these coming out each and every week, and we'll see what's up with Brock next. Peace out, guys.